Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Scott Ritter, and Scott is going to talk a little bit about the speech that he gave on August 6th, the commemoration of Hiroshima. So you said a number of really interesting things. I saw the video of it. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is the the bomb was transferred to the men who made it, to the men who would use it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there's a scene from the movie Oppenheimer, um, in which the lead character, um, Robert Oppenheimer, this is after the test of the of the Trinity device that took place on July 16th, 1945. First test of a nuclear bomb had been a success, and the movie had led up to this point. You see the various scientists that Oppenheimer was working with, you know, moralize about the bomb, the nature of the weapon. And one thing that came across was that many of these scientists were Jewish, and they were motivated to build this horrible weapon by fear that Nazi Germany would get the bomb first, and that there was an absolute need for the West, for democracy, the forces of democracy, to have this weapon to um, ensure that the evil Nazi regime of Adolf Hitler wasn't able to use nuclear weapons to either destroy the West or to intimidate the West into submission. So that seemed to be their motivating factor. But the device was tested on July 16th, 1945. Um, almost 2.5 months after Nazi Germany surrendered. And that's an important thing to note here, that the device was tested, proven, without the motivation that had driven the scientists, including Oppenheimer. And But Oppenheimer now is looking at the men packaging up this device, because understand, the device is not a weapon. The device can't be delivered. The device is it means that you can get a fission activity that generates a burst of energy. But to turn it into a bomb, it had to be turned over to the U.S. military. You had a special ordnance um, unit that would put that into a casing that would become a bomb that could be delivered by a just a second. My dogs are destroying something, but deliver this device to a target. And so Oppenheimer's looking at them, and he's ever the scientist. He starts to say, if you deploy this device at this altitude, and the guys looked at him with respect. They said, "It's okay, doctor. We'll take it from here." Meaning, your job's done. We don't want to hear anything about what you think regarding these. Your job is to build something. We're now going to use it. And they did. They dropped it on Japan, um, which was not Nazi Germany. Um, and there's a lot of controversy about this. I talked in my speech about the pilot of the Enola Gay, and how he spent his entire life not worried by the fact that he dropped this bomb on Hiroshima. He believed that it was a mission that needed to be done. And I understand that from a military standpoint. I also spoke in the speech about back when I was in a nuclear capable artillery unit in the United States Marine Corps. We trained twice a year to deploy, to use a nuclear weapon. And there's a whole procedure that has to take place. And, as I said, if we were in combat and we were told to fire that device, we would have, without question. And I never would have questioned it, because that was my job. The men who received the device from Oppenheimer, that was their job, to deploy this weapon. But the thing I point out is, we can't be comfortable with that as Americans. We can't be comfortable with, and my dogs can't be comfortable with it either, apparently, but we can't be comfortable with turning this over to professionals, cold-hearted professionals who will do the job. You know, and I take umbrage. There's a lot of people who responded to the speech saying, you know, you can't use the Nazi, I was ordered to do it. Hey, go to hell. Really? If you have no clue what modern war is, understand that if I were called upon to use a nuclear device, it would be against a Soviet threat that is armed with nuclear weapons, that had broken through and were threatening the survival of me, my men, my country. So pound sand, people. You have no clue what you're talking about. You know, don't equate America with Nazi Germany. At least not while I was there. You know, the Enola Gay, look, there were people who said we need to drop the bomb to save 1 million lives. That's a legitimate argument. Had we invaded Japan, a lot of Americans would have died. Other people say, including myself, that Japan was on the cusp of surrendering, that we didn't need to invade, that if we just began a negotiation, we could have brought them to the surrender table without the need to invade or drop a bomb. But there's another argument that that's out there that people like to ignore, and that's the Soviet Union and the concern in the Truman administration. Because remember, this wasn't Franklin Delano Roosevelt anymore. This was Harry Truman, who had a completely different mindset towards the Russians. He didn't have the wartime experience with Roosevelt and negotiating with Stalin. And Truman wanted to send a message to the Russians. Truman was irritated about what he believed were the Russians breaking their promise about Poland and Eastern Europe. So he wanted to send a signal to the Russians that America had this device, had this weapon, and Russia should take note. And so that may have been the reason why they dropped it. It's interesting in researching my speech, and believe it or not, I actually spend a lot of time reading up before I give a presentation to make sure that I fact check what I'm trying to say. I found out something interesting. We were going to bomb Japan no matter what. It didn't matter. Even if Nazi Germany is around and we need to drop this bomb on Nazi Germany, we're going to bomb Japan no matter what. Because the feeling was, once you use this weapon, it's no longer a secret. And so we needed to hit them both at the same time. And we were preparing to bomb both German cities and Japanese cities from the very beginning. So again, we can take all the moralizing. Was this about saving American lives? Was this about compelling Japan to surrender? Was it about sending a signal to the Soviets? And it doesn't matter, because we were going to bomb them no matter what. There's the problem. You see, we have nuclear weapons, and we've turned them over to people who are going to use them no matter what. We have a doctrine today that says we will use nuclear weapons preemptively against any enemy, regardless of the threat. If the nuclear threat doesn't matter, we will use them. And as Americans, we should take umbrage with that. We should say no. We should, instead of doing like Oppenheimer, when they turn to you and say, it's okay, boss, we'll take it from here. We need to intervene and say, no, we'll take it from here. You're not going to use these weapons. We don't give you permission to use these weapons. We don't give you permission to consider using these weapons. We want to eliminate these weapons. That's what we should be doing. Otherwise, we are merely observers in a drama in which we have no input on, and it's a drama that will inevitably end in our collective demise.
Okay, so fast forward this to Ronald Reagan's administration. When Ronald Reagan saw the movie the day after, it scared the living daylights out of him. Okay, that was a signal, a warning to him of how difficult it would be. And you said he turned to his aides and said, will it be that bad? And they said, his aides said, no, it would be a lot worse, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that was in the 1980s. And then what precipitated an arms negotiation? Was it the day after? Was it Ronald Reagan? What precipitated the negotiations in the 80s?
What we can say is that Ronald Reagan, when he became president, was a hardcore conservative communist hating man. No questions asked. He called the Soviet Union the evil empire. And he was loath to engage in arms control. The the discussions that had begun under Nixon, carried on through Ford, carried on through Carter, were pretty much put on ice by Ronald Reagan. He instead focused on rebuilding America's nuclear arsenal. He's the man who, when the Soviets began deploying the SS-20 intermediate range missile in Europe, um, made the decision that we were going to deploy our own intermediate range missiles. There weren't going to be any INF discussions, and strategic arms reduction talks were not happening. And the decision to deploy INF systems in Europe created a large anti-nuclear weapon movement in Europe and in the United States. A lot of people forget that a German government was brought down because of these intermediate nuclear weapons and the demonstrations that took place against them. In 1982, in Central Park, in June 1982, there was a massive demonstration. 1 million people gathered to protest in favor of arms control, against nuclear war, in favor of nuclear disarmament. And that's a big signal. I mean, any politician worth their salt, especially in a democracy, can't ignore 1 million people showing up, because if 1 million people show up someplace, that means that there's tens of millions of people who didn't show up but believe in that message, because we know not everybody goes to the demonstration, but a lot of people support the demonstration. So, that has to weigh on his mind. Then in 1983, the day after, comes on air. Now, we have to back this up. Ronald Reagan, there was an assassination attempt against his life. And when he was in the hospital, he had, this is according to his own memoirs and to people close to him, he had sort of an awakening, come to Jesus moment, if you might say, where he was confronted with his mortality, and he began to question things such as, what are we doing? Why are we here? What is my purpose? And he looked, and he was the president of the United States, and I think he was struck with the fact that he is responsible for a nation of several 100 million people. Day after comes in, and he sees this, he watches this, and he, as you said, he turned to his aide and he said, "Is it going to be that bad?" I said, "No, boss, it's going to be much worse." And he said, "That's insane. That's insane. What are we doing about this?" The answer was, and that's when Ronald Reagan became an advocate for nuclear arms reduction. Not just reduction. A lot of people don't know this, but in 1986, he met with Mikhail Gorbachev in Reykjavik, Iceland, to discuss nuclear arms reductions. And there was a moment when they both sat there, and basically Reagan said, "Why don't we get rid of them all? Everything. Just get rid of nuclear weapons." And Gorbachev was like, "I like that idea." But then Gorbachev said something. He said, "That means you have to get rid of strategic defense initiative too. If we're going to get rid of nuclear weapons, and there's no reason for this strategic defense initiative missile shield to be around." The Soviets were very concerned about SDI. And Reagan said, "No, I can't do that." And then the deal collapsed. But there was a moment when Ronald Reagan, hardcore conservative, anti-Soviet guy, was like, "Let's get rid of them all," because he recognized how stupid it is to have these weapons. Nuclear weapons are literally the definition of insanity. They don't achieve anything. They only threaten our destruction. And to continue to advocate not only for their retention, but a nuclear posture that postulates conditions under which they could be used in a non-deterrent based, non-retaliatory measure, meaning that we'll use nuclear weapons first, is not just insanity, it's criminal. It makes America a criminal enterprise. We are a nation that threatens the world's existence, and people have a right to view us as such. Reagan was able to sit down with Gorbachev, and they struck a compromise, which was to get rid of intermediate nuclear forces, the SS-20 missile, to the Glickums. And that's the one I was involved in, the world's first nuclear reduction treaty, eliminating weapons. And it was a start. It was a sort of a way to test the waters. Could the Soviets be trusted? We put inspectors on the ground. Would the Soviets comply or would they cheat? It was the testing ground. And what we found is that the Soviets didn't cheat, that they did comply. And the Soviets tested us, and they found that we didn't cheat, we did comply, that we were serious about this endeavor to get rid of weapons, which allowed us to go in with confidence for the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. And we were on the path of reducing these arsenals when the Soviet Union collapsed. And then suddenly the American mindset went away from viewing the Soviets or the Russians as our equals, therefore a threat worthy of negotiating good faith to reduce nuclear arsenals, to the Russians are a defeated nation, a weak nation, and they aren't our equals. Therefore, we will retain our nuclear supremacy, our unilateral advantage, and we will use arms control to sustain this, not to save the world, but project American power. And we destroyed arms control. It led to a series of events. The decision by George W. Bush in 2001, 2002 to walk away from the anti-ballistic missile treaty, sort of a foundational treaty that empowered the notion of mutually assured destruction, because the ABM treaty said we won't defend ourselves against nuclear attack. Therefore, if there's a nuclear war, we all die. And since we know we're all going to die, let's not have a nuclear war. That was the idea behind MAD. Bush said, nah, we're America. We got the superpower status. Russia's a defeated nation. We're not worried about you anymore. So we're getting out of this treaty because we want to protect ourselves. We want to secure our advantage with missile defense. So we left the treaty. That undid decades of arms control. Then we pulled out of the INF treaty. That was Donald Trump. We lied about a Russian a Russian violation when we were the ones violating. We put INF capable systems in Poland and Romania. The Mark 41 Aegis Ashore, when it's on a ship, it can fire an SM-3 surface-to-air missile, but it can also fire the Tomahawk cruise missile. You put the same system on the ground, but you tell the Russians, hey, don't worry, in those pods, it's only SM-3s, but we're not going to let you inspect. It's only SM-3s, though. Trust us. We would never lie to you. Then we withdrew from the ABM treaty, or from the INF treaty. Less than a month later, we tested a cruise missile fired from a Mark 41 ashore system. Now, anybody knows anything about tests, it takes years to plan these tests, which means we have been planning for years to get out of the INF treaty. We're the ones that did this, not the Russians. We're the ones to blame. Then we violated the Open Skies Treaty. We pulled out of that. Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty. We never played honest with that. We've destroyed arms control. And when I say we, what I mean is the guys that we entrusted. Do you remember those people at the beginning of the Oppenheimer, or when we talked about in the Oppenheimer movie? We said, we got it from here. Well, we gave it to them, and look what they've done. They can't be trusted. When you see a man in uniform today who says, I'm an arms control negotiator, understand he's not about arms control conventional. What he's saying is, my job is to sustain a unilateral American advantage over everybody. That's not arms control. That's dominance. It's domination. It's the antithesis. They can't be trusted anymore. We have to take control back from them.
Okay, so as of right now, arms control negotiations have been destroyed. There is none. Am I correct?
I know ongoing arms control.
I can't hear you.
That there are no ongoing arms control negotiations in the United States and Russia.
Okay.
The last viable treaty is New START, signed in 2010. It expires in 2026. Mm-hmm. Normally, it takes 3 to 5 years to negotiate a serious treaty. It's 2023. We're running out of time. And it looks like if we don't get these discussions going, the treaty will expire without a new treaty in place at a time when both the United States and Russia are modernizing their nuclear forces, which means we'll have a nuclear arms race without any mechanism of control.
So we're going into the 2024 election with basically no arms negotiation treaties that we could identify, right?
Right.
Okay. So we're going into this the election, and I believe that the American people, for the most part, are unaware of this. You turn on the TV, you pick up the paper, and it's Biden this or Biden that, and Trump with all of his legal problems, but nuclear weapons is not in the dialogue, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so we're, as you had said previously, we're like 1 second away from doomsday. So the people in this country, I know you want to do the rally in the summertime with 1 million people, but at the same time, people have got to be aware of the dangers and to force the media to draw attention to what's going on and talk about it. Would you say that would be right?
In theory, but how do you force the media? There's the question.
The media is like keeping the people uninformed.
Right, but how do you force the media? They're not going to invite me on MSNBC. They're not going to invite me on CNN. They're not going to invite me on Fox. The YouTube will shut me down. Twitter X has shut me down in the past. The point is, this is a message that the powers that be do not want to be heard. You have one candidate out there who talked about John F. Kennedy's speech at American University back in 1962. His American University speech. That was RFK Jr., who was the nephew of John F. Kennedy. One candidate who spoke about that, because that American University speech was a speech that said we need to save the world from the threat of nuclear weapons. Joe Biden's not talking about it. Donald Trump's not talking about it. Who knows what Joe Biden's doing? I don't even think he thinks anymore. Donald Trump is so focused on resolving this legal thing and using it as a vehicle to promote his candidacy that he's not focused on the issues that matter. And unless they talk about it, the mainstream media is not going to deal with it. RFK Jr. talked about it. He's being ignored by the mainstream media. That's the problem. How do we get people aware? And we do it through this underground alternative media platform. But this alternative media platform exists at the whim of the powers that be. They can unplug you. They can unplug me. They have unplugged me. Hopefully, they'll never unplug you. But the point is, I'll guarantee you this, Cynthia. If this video went viral, you got 1 million views, your YouTube channel will be shut down that quick because you're now a threat. That's the reality of alternative media. That's the reality of the platforms that we use. So, this is a very frustrating thing. This is why we have to put 1 million people in the streets. Now, again, the mainstream media is not going to pay attention to our dialogue. But if you put 1 million people in the street, they can't ignore it. They can't ignore it. And the politicians, like Ronald Reagan before them, can't ignore it. So this is why I'm such an advocate. You know me, Cynthia. I told you I don't like demonstrations. I hated them in the lead up to the Iraq War because they didn't accomplish anything. I've been in a 1 million person march before. I was in London when 1 million people went to the streets. I was in New York City when hundreds of thousands went to the streets. I've seen it. I tried to believe in it. It failed. It failed miserably. But when you take a look at this problem, as you said, we're 1 millisecond away from the world ending. All it takes is one act of stupidity, one miscalculation, and it's done. There's no such thing as a limited nuclear war. Once a nuclear weapon is used, they will all be used and we will all die. And every day we have nuclear forces out there that are positioned to be used. We have a conflict in Ukraine that could go nuclear at any moment. How do we by the time the mainstream media wakes up, there will be about a 20-minute window when the nuclear weapons are launched, when you'll see all the talking heads, all the beautiful hairdos, all the wonderful features sit there and suddenly go, oh, beep, because they'll realize it's over. They're going to die. We're all going to die. But it's too late at that point in time. These talking heads, this is why they're useless. Every single one of these talking heads has a platform. And if they cared about their children, if they cared about their grandchildren, if they cared about the future of humanity, they would be talking about this issue. They don't have to agree with me, but they should be discussing this issue. This is an issue that Americans should be made aware of. We should have a right to debate whether or not we want to continue to have a nuclear posture that says we can use nuclear weapons preemptively anytime we want to. And remember, that's posture. People say, "That's Scott. That's the reality of the world." How about the thinking behind it? Do Americans realize that there was a Deputy Secretary of Defense in the Trump administration who gave a speech at the Arms Control Association? So this isn't some whack job organization. These are the professionals, the men that we've entrusted, men and women we've entrusted our nuclear arms control association. He gave a speech where he said, the goal of my administration, Trump administration, is that every morning when Russians and Chinese officials wake up, we want them to be uncertain whether or not this is the day we'll nuke them. That's an official U.S. government representative, the representative of the people, saying he wants the Chinese and the Russians to wake up every morning uncertain whether or not this is the day America will nuke them. Ladies and gentlemen, that's criminal. That's insane. And yet they're there. Now, the same policy that empowered him to say that exists with the Biden administration. And I can guarantee you that Jake Sullivan thinks the same way. I can guarantee you that Tony Blinken thinks the same way, that Mark Miley thinks the same way, that Lloyd Austin thinks the same way. And you say, well, how can you guarantee? Because they didn't change the policy. They know the underlying thinking behind the policy, and they didn't change it. So they think the same way. They want the Russians and the Chinese on edge. Now, let's reverse it for a minute, America. How about you waking up every morning uncertain whether or not the Chinese or the Russians are just going to end your life? Fortunately, Chinese and the Russians have mature leadership. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping don't think like that. But our leaders do. We elect them. We put them in there, and then we do nothing about it. We have failed. We have failed collectively. Now, failure doesn't mean it's the end. I'm very critical of the anti-war movement. You know that. I'm very critical of them. But recently, I had reason to reread Theodore Roosevelt's poem, "The Man in the Arena." Are you familiar with it?
No.
Well, it basically talks. It likens life. He says, I'll paraphrase it, but he said, the heck with the critics, the people who sit there in the stands criticize. The boxer goes in the arena and he gets knocked out. And all the critics criticize him for losing the fight. He said, but it's the man in the arena who has to pick himself up, dust himself off with the scars of the struggle. He's the one that counts. It's the man in the arena who's trying, who learns through his failure how to succeed. I'd like to believe that the anti-war movement, the anti-nuclear movement, can be the modern day equivalent of that man in the arena, or woman. Let's be equal nowadays. But you guys got your butts kicked in Iraq. You did. You got slaughtered. You don't count anymore. Nobody takes you seriously. All the people are in the stadium looking down at you saying, you suck, because you do. But are you just going to lay there on the canvas and bleed and whine and whimper? Or are you going to stand up and say, yeah, I got a scar. I earned that scar. And I'm learning from that scar. Now I'm going to go back and redouble my efforts, and I'm going to get it right this time. I'm going to win. That's what the man in the arena does. Let's be the man in the arena. Let's be the person that learns from our failures, learns from our mistakes, and goes out there and succeeds. Because you know what? The stakes have never been higher. It's literally a question of life and death.
Okay. About how many million Americans, how many people live in America today?
I mean, the census doesn't really count them all, but I think the number is between 320, 340 million, somewhere around there.
Okay. Let's use the number 40 million. 40 million people.
400 million then.
Okay,
300,
whatever,
yeah,
whatever.
440 million, yeah.
Okay, so if you're gonna do a rally in New York City of 1 million people, I don't believe that's really exerting political muscle. It has to be 1 million people in every metropolitan area across this country. Then maybe the elected officials will take notice. But I don't think 1 million people, you're exerting political muscle to a certain extent, but not enough to change their minds. How do we change their minds? How do we mobilize people across this country to say no more of this nonsense?
If I knew the answer to that, you and I wouldn't be having that discussion. Okay, how we do it? Is there a playbook? In 1982, it was done by bringing together a coalition of like-minded groups from the left wing and the right wing, from Democrat, Republican, pacifists. They all came together in a cause that said no more nukes. How do we do that today? We have to do the same thing. We can't make this a Democratic issue. We can't make it a Republican issue. We can't make it a whatever that libertarian issue, a green issue. It's an American issue. Every American has to wake up and say, I want to live. That's the bottom line. I choose to live. And if you're going to say, I choose to live, then you have to say, I choose to live by getting rid of that which threatens my existence on a daily basis. And that's nuclear weapons. How do we get that? We have to keep doing what we're doing. We have to find a way to expand our audience, how to get this message out to others. We have to build networks. And again, I mean, because I'm a man who has studied patterns and I know patterns, I have to tell you right now, Cynthia, I'm not optimistic, because I look at the anti-war movement, I look at the peace movement, I look at any movement out there, and they all suck. There's not a single one of them that's willing to break free of their little clique that they have. They're important. We're the most important ones. If it doesn't benefit us, we're not going to do it. We're not going to cede any potential advantage to a potential opponent down the road. They're looking at it, and what's going to happen is you're going to die. And when you die, I have to be honest, my last thing before I chug the bottle of bourbon, as waiting for the thing to go, is I'm going to curse you all. And I'm going to laugh in your faces. And I'll say curse words. I'll say, stick it up your you-know-what, F you, and all that, because that's all you deserve. You suck as human beings. Literally, you suck as human beings. If you're not out there willing to dump the facade of petty politics to focus on that which will make you be able to go on and be petty in your political beliefs. Understand, see what I'm saying here? Let's just get rid of the nuclear threat. And then you can go on and be stupid you want, whatever cause you want. Do it. But you're not going to be able to do your cause if you're dead, and you're going to die when there is a nuclear war. So I don't care if your thing is save the whales, save the birds, save the planet, climate change, segregation, racial, women rights, gay rights, transgender rights. I don't care, because none of it matters. None of it matters, because you're all going to be dead. So let's get together, save the world, bring an end to this arms race, nip a nuclear conflict in the bud. Then we can all go back to being petty, political, stupid human beings. Because here's the thing, it's interesting. You talk to astronauts, and that you're down here on the Earth, they're all doing their thing with everybody else, the politics of NASA, et cetera. But then they get launched into space. They're out there, and the further they get away from the Earth, the more fragile it looks. And they just suddenly realize, my God, this is a very fragile thing. It could be in, when you look at the vast expanse of the universe, and then you look at the Earth, how fragile it is, and how fragile life is, how precious life is. And it puts everything in perspective. And they come back and they're just like, hey, all that stuff that you guys are like worried about here, it won't matter, because What matters is saving the planet. What matters is saving, the ability to sustain life on the planet. We all need to take that step back from whatever it is that drives us. Whatever it is that drives us, we have to take that step back and say, how do we preserve life on the planet? Now, I know the climate change people, what we do it by the, yeah, but it won't matter because you're going to die before any of that happens. Not from climate. You'll die from the most extreme kind of climate change. 500 million, the big atomic bomb in your face, the hydrogen bomb. That's climate change. That's the climate change you're going to die from, not anything else. You're not going to be able to do anything you want to do if you're dead. And the things that could kill you quicker than anything else is a nuclear conflict. That's the path we're headed on. AC/DC should become our theme song, Highway to Hell, because that's what we are. We're on the highway to hell.
I'm sure that you and I will be having this discussion over the coming year.
Not if we die.
So you've been listening to Scott Ritter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. So if you like this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for taking the time to be on, Scott, and thank you, everybody.